Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me. So today I wanted to talk about pelvic tension and muscle tightness. So this is something that affects a lot of women, about 50% of women actually, and more frequently once we hit the peri-menopausal years. So basically, once we start to have our progesterone slowly dropping away, and once our ovaries stop producing our estrogen on a regular basis, and we start to fluctuate with that estrogen, and then slowly that estrogen diminishes over time, right up until we actually go through the menopause and beyond. So once we lose that estrogen, we really do find for a lot of people that tightness of muscles and tension patterns and a whole plethora of issues that stem from this natural aging process can be quite a problem. So there's an awful lot that we can do in order to make ourselves a lot more comfortable and make the body function way better and just feel better about ourselves. And obviously that reflects on how we show up in the world. So I just wanted to share some tips with you today and give you a little bit of insight into this incredibly common issue for women. And like I said, especially in midlife. So the pelvis is obviously the center of our being, and the pelvis and the pelvic area is kind of this area that is kind of from above the waist to just below the bum, and it incorporates the bum muscles, the hip joints, the lower belly, the internal organs, the pelvic floor. And if any of you have gone for a big long run and not stretched out afterwards, you'll know what it feels like to feel tight in this area. We find that a lot of issues actually stem from tension with the pelvic floor. So things that you might perceive as weakness, and therefore you might need to do a whole lot of strengthening exercises, can actually be tightness and an inability for muscles to become hydrated and lengthened and therefore contract properly. So the common issues that we tend to find are things like pain, just a feeling of discomfort and pain, and it can be literally anywhere in the pelvis. It could be around the tailbone, it could be shooting into the buttocks, around the sitting bones, around the piriformis. It could even be referring down the leg a little bit. You might have pain actually at the pubic bone if there's pubis symphysis issues because of tension. You might have a heaviness in the actual pelvic floor muscles, or sort of in the vagina, a feeling of tension and heaviness there. You could have an agitated bladder. So the bladder is often affected by tension patterns and becomes a bit hyperactive, so overactive, and it can lead to frequency, needing to go to the loo all the time, or that sudden urge to go to the loo inappropriately when you don't, your bladder's not actually completely full. It can lead to, this is a big problem, constipation and issues with elimination. So constipation, we also know, is a main driver for urinary incontinence. So tension patterns can often lead to constipation, and this just makes you feel rubbish. And obviously then can lead on to straining on the loo. We do not want to be straining on the loo because this can lead to too much pressure down on the pelvic floor. If the pelvic floor muscles are either too lax or there's tension there and so they can't contract properly, and there's not tone there, too much pressure downwards when you're going to the loo can also affect their organs and make them press inwards and downwards, and potentially lead to or exacerbate pelvic organ prolapse. So tension is something that we really truly need to deal with, and unfortunately our lives are quite tense. There's always so much going on, and people are often in that kind of fight or flight state the whole time and don't breathe slowly or properly, don't use their diaphragm, certainly don't take breath into the lower lobes or to the lower belly area. And so their sympathetic nervous system is constantly switched on. And unfortunately, especially for women, a lot of the tension that this starts to manifest in the body shows up around the pelvis. and especially in those pelvic floor muscles. So there are lots of things that we need to be doing in order to get a hold on this tension. First of all, just kind of acknowledging maybe where it is stemming from. So it could be stemming from the fact that your posture is not great. I mean, if you're somebody who has always sucked your belly in and tucked your tail under to try and make yourself look skinnier, then over time, that complete misalignment and tension can cause all sorts of havoc with your breathing patterns, with tension around the pelvic area, with constipation and so on and so forth. So one thing might just be looking at your alignment and doing exercises in order to create a better posture. The next thing is your breathing patterns, obviously. So if you are a chest breather, if you're a mouth breather, then working on your breathing is really, really essential. So aligned posture, and then using the intercostal muscles between your ribs to breathe, diaphragmatically breathing, making sure the diaphragm isn't stuck so that you can get a wonderful, good oxygen exchange for the body, and you can get a full breath in and then slow your exhale right down. So yoga breathing is just literally the best thing you can possibly learn to do, because it really does help you psychologically and physiologically enormously, especially when we're in those midlife years and beyond, when things like insomnia can start to become a problem. So learning to slow your breath down, breathe fully, slow your breath down, stimulate the vagus nerve, which is how we get into that rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system, is super important. So cause of tension can be incorrect breathing. It can often stem from birthing trauma. So that's why the training for birth, so that you try and protect your pelvic floor muscles as much as possible, but also the postnatal recovery period is just so important, because once we come into the perimenopausal years and we start to lose this essential estrogen, and the whole of the pelvic bowl area is very estrogen rich. It's estriol rich specifically. That's a type of estrogen that our muscle fibers and our bladder and around our uterus and the rectum is very rich in estriol estrogen. And so when that starts to diminish in perimenopause, we can find that the muscle fibers become dehydrated. They just don't contract properly. They're less plump around the sphincter muscles and so on and so forth. So we find that trauma that's happened in birth basically comes back again. So if you had weakness, leaking issues around birth, if the sphincter muscle didn't close properly, then estrogen was better in the preceding years, and then when you hit your mid-40s, estrogen drops and you find that the sphincters don't close properly again. That can happen. Prolapse can become a little bit worse. So the band of muscle, the levator ani that's holding your organs in place, if that was damaged in birth with either a forceps delivery or a prolonged pushing phase, for example, episiotomy can also cause this kind of issue with prolapse. Organs can drop and can shift, and this can be more of a problem when we lose our estrogen. So stuff that happened in birth coming back again. It can be any trauma, childhood trauma. It could be sexual abuse. So anything around the pelvic area that has caused muscle fibers to contract, to hold. So like I said, an episiotomy where there has been scar tissue, the puckering of the scar tissue, the adhesions that can cause, can also drag organs, literally drag through the fascial system towards that scar tissue, which tends to be downwards. So all of this stuff can cause tension. The other thing is simply by not doing movements, daily movements, that keeps mobility through your joints. So if you're somebody who sits an awful lot, then you are going to find that you seize up, especially, like I said, once you start to lose your estrogen in midlife, this area really seizes up, especially these big rotator muscles around the hip joints. Once you're stiff there, quite often you get inner thigh muscles that are very stiff as well, tightness through these adductors. They lead straight up into the pelvic floor muscles. So if your hips are tight, if your adductors are tight, quite often that will then put tension patterns into the pelvic floor. And like I said, it can lead on to constipation, a feeling of heaviness, urge frequency, and so on and so forth. So we want to be able to mobilize these hips, release tension in your quads, your adductor muscles, your inner thigh muscles, and your bum muscles. Make sure that the pelvic bones can kind of move well with the muscles. So the muscles are skeletal, which means they're attached onto the pelvic bones. So where your bones sit directly affect how well your muscles work. Similarly, how tight your muscles are will affect where your bones sit. So opening the pelvis and at the same time using your breath well can make a profound difference in A, how comfortable you feel, B, how you end up being able to do all your other exercises, and C, how your body actually functions. So just a couple of really easy techniques to make sure that this area does stay a bit more open and supple is, one, when you're maybe switching on the kettle to have a cup of tea, circle your pelvis, like do big circles with your hips as if you've got a hula hoop around your waist. Just massage your hips around, or maybe you do this when you're brushing your teeth, one direction and then the other. Get into the habit of doing this kind of groovy circling movement. It's wonderful to get good vascular flow through the organs and just to loosen everything up. So whether you do that when you're sitting or when you're standing, or maybe even on all fours. So I'll show you now all fours kind of movement, where you are taking your hips either around in a big circle. So we drop the hips over to the sides as we take the pelvis right around. You imagine if you've dropped a pebble into a still lake and there's little ripples of circles that go out and out. You're trying to do the same thing with your hips, big circles, making them as slow as you possibly can. And then the other thing is just to maybe come onto your forearms and just to circle your bottom behind you. So imagine you've got a big pencil out of your butthole and you're drawing circles on the wall behind you. So it's that kind of big circling action, one direction and the other. This can just help get lovely blood flow through the lower belly. If you've got cramping, tension, cramping, wonderful way just to relieve all of that. And because your bum is up in this position, you're also stretching your sitting bones wide. And so you are lengthening the muscles between your sitting bones. Now, while we're on all fours, I'm going to get you to take your knees a bit wider and slide them apart and bring your toes towards each other, so like a frog. And then just slowly take your hips back towards your heels. So we're stretching the inner thigh muscles here, but we're also taking the sitting bones wide apart. There's no pressure of the pelvic organs down on the pelvic floor. Everything's dropping down towards your pubic bones. So a really nice way to relieve tension on the pelvic floor. Maybe stack one fist on top of the other and one hand on top of the other and rest your forehead down. And just go into full yoga breathing here. So take the breath into the back of your lungs, the lower lobes in the back of your lungs. Try and stretch the breath underneath your armpits into these intercostal muscles down the side of your ribs. And then slowly pull the breath up towards the top of your lungs. So like you're filling up a big vase from the bottom out to the sides and then up to the top. And then as you exhale, extend your exhalation, make it as long as possible. And a way to do that is to create a bit of sound with your breath out. So either a humming sound, like a buzzy beat, like this, or maybe just loosen your jaw as you do, like a And as you're exhaling, try to let your pelvic floor muscles and your bum muscles, everything just really soften and expand. So people describe it as if you are laying an egg. It's that kind of softness through the pelvic floor muscles. And when you create low vibrational sound on an exhalation, it extends the exhalation, so it makes the vagus nerve be stimulated. be the low vibrational sound, literally vibrates through your body, through the water content of your body. So it just helps everything really calm. And see, it actually stimulates the pituitary gland as well. So we start to produce more of the hormones that we need. It calms the adrenals as well. And when we hit perimenopause, we really rely on our adrenals to produce the estrogen and the progesterone that we need as the ovaries stop producing them. And if the adrenals are being required to pump out adrenaline and cortisol, if we're stressed and we're speaking fast and we're speaking in a high tone and we're getting things done, then those poor adrenals will be pumping out the stress hormones and they will not produce the incredibly important sex hormones, progesterone, estrogen, etc., that we need in order for us to function well. So this kind of position, really, really nice. You can do the similar kind of thing lying on your back. So you can prop your pelvis. I've got a bolster here to prop the pelvis and lie on your back. This again takes all of the weight of the organs off your pelvic floor, and it's really nice and comfortable as well. So I'm going to get you to take your knees up and wide. So we're sort of in a frog position, but the other way around now. So a frog on your back, but with your bum bolstered up as well. So this is a really nice way to open up the whole pelvic area, including those inner thighs, these adductors, which I find, honestly, so many women are very, very tight here and very tight in the hips. So have a little play with drawing your knees up and around in big circles. Visualize the big rotator muscles that are around your hip joints and see if you can slow your breathing down, slow the movement right down, and just feel this nice kind of lubrication of these muscles. And then drop your knees out to the side, toes towards each other. Just grab your hands onto your shins or your ankles and gently press outwards with your forearms. So for those of you who can't see me, if you're just listening to this, I'm lying on my back. I've got a bolster, but you could just use a couple of firm pillows underneath the pelvis. So the pelvis is slightly lifted. Toes are in, knees are bent, and knees are dropping out to the side. So kind of in a sort of squatting position, but on my back. Hands holding on to shin or just down towards your ankles if you can reach. And very gently pressing outwards with the forearms, stretching those inner thighs. And when you're in this position, you want to wriggle your jaw, like so, and then consciously relax your jaw, because the jaw and the pelvic floor muscles are deeply fascially connected. So when you consciously release the lower jaw, it can help you to soften this area, including the inner thigh area. So focus on releasing the lower jaw as you breathe out. See if you can make a bit of sound as you breathe out, like a just a hum like that. It'll really help calm your central nervous system just so quickly. Just humming out, or low vibrational sound with an open mouth. That kind of thing. And then after you've spent about 3 minutes in this position, maybe 5, try taking your feet up towards the ceiling. Now, it's quite nice if you're in this position. This is called baby pose. If you have a strap, you can use a scarf or a strap or something like this, and you just want to take it over the balls of your feet so you can have nice wide feet, and then you can make your shoulders drop down onto the ground. Bend your elbows, just hold onto the strap so that there's no tension through your shoulders, and you can really focus on relaxing the upper body. And just, this is a deep stretch into the groin area, right into the whole pelvic bowl. You can just focus on softening everything. There's a heaviness to your legs, heaviness dropping down towards the ground with your knees, toes drawn back, heels up towards the ceiling. Again, nice, heavy, soft jaw, allowing the breath to open up the whole pelvic area. Use that long, extended exhalation with the sound just to soften everything. And it's really nice in this position also to close your eyes and soften the little muscles around your eyes. Once you do that, you let the forehead soften, the little muscles around your eyes soften, the cheeks soften, really loosen your jaw. It's amazing how concentrating on softening your facial muscles helps the rest of the body to relax. So spending, again, if you have got tension patterns, spending a good 3-5 minutes in this position daily is going to help you so much, and very quickly as well. Very, very quickly. So you can have a little play when you're on your back, stretching into your hamstrings as well. So now I've taken the belt just around one foot, around the ball of one foot, put the other foot onto the ground, so that I'm lengthening the back of my leg into the hamstrings, into the calf muscles. Quite often when we are tight in our hamstrings, our pelvis is pulled under. When our pelvis is pulled under, quite often our head wants to be in the same line with our pelvis, so our head juts forward, and that tends to pull our shoulders forward as well, and boom, there goes that alignment between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Our posture's mucked up, our breathing is mucked up, and we tend to get a lot tighter in the hip area. So making sure that you keep your hamstrings and your calf muscles as lengthened as you can. So I'm doing a stretch here, just with the back of the legs. When you've got your pelvis propped up, like I've got right now, you can also lengthen the lower leg along the ground, and that will help to open up the psoas muscles. So the psoas muscles are really key pelvic muscles. They go from the inner thigh area. So if your inner thighs are tight, this might be tight as well. They go right through the pelvic floor muscles. Then they go through the diaphragm, so they affect your breathing, and then they insert into your lower back. So if these guys are tight from doing too much sitting, from having trauma that hasn't been processed, then they can just pull on your lower back, and you can quite often end up with debilitating lower back pain or pelvic pain, and it can actually be these hip flexors that need to be released. So they're doing this kind of inverted stretch, really nice. You do that on both legs, working on the calf, the hamstrings, and then maybe extending the lower leg to work on the hip flexors as well. Wonderful. And lastly, make sure gluteal muscles get strengthened. So that's your squats, your lunges, your walking. We want these guys to be strong, but we also don't want to create too much tension in your bum. So if you are feeling tight around the hips or in the buttocks, then doing this kind of figure of 4 stretch. And again, I'm just staying up on this bolster, so organs are dropping away from pelvic floor. And this very slight inversion that I'm in right now, unless you've got glaucoma and any other reasons why you shouldn't be in any kind of inversion, this is wonderful for just getting the exhalation to extend naturally. So any kind of subtle inversion like I'm in now, really, really great for calming the central nervous system down and getting into that parasympathetic nervous state, so that real healing state. So this is a figure of 4 stretch. Knee is drawing up towards body, other knee is dropping out to the side, deep stretch into the hips. And you want to hold this for 1 minute, 2 minutes on both sides. I'm just hooking my belt around my foot to help me bring my foot in slightly, using my hand just on my thigh to very gently push the knee out to the side, get deeper into that stretch. Good. So this is actually a little bit like pigeon pose, but we're upside down. So those are just a couple of stretches you could be doing. And I suggest if you have got pelvic issues that you try and do opening stretches daily. And you also find a guided meditation, like the ones that I've got in the chill out space, to do at least once a week, maybe twice a week, in order to help you to connect with the pelvic area, to connect with your breathing, and just to let everything kind of calm and release and open. Remember, we're aiming for good vascular, good blood flow through our muscles. And releasing muscle tension is, I would say, more important than strengthening. I mean, it's definitely just as important, but we really do need to once we get to the midlife, we've got to bring conscious awareness to how we relax. And because this area really seems to be the pain point for many, many women, focusing on learning how to release tension from the pelvis and doing this as a practice on a consistent basis can really be quite life-changing, could be profoundly life-changing. So I really welcome you to send me any questions that you have around this. Definitely go into the library and look at the pelvic tension release exercises. There's some sequences there. Do those if this is an issue for you. Join the Friday posture and pelvic floor restore class, or if you can't join live, there's recorded classes every week in the tent. So go and do those on a regular basis. Prioritize this because it really does make a massive difference on how your pelvic floor functions, on how you feel about yourself and how you feel tension-wise after doing other exercises. It affects how much you want to have sex and how easy sex is. So for many, many reasons, it's important to look after this primal part of your body. One other little issue that you might want to consider is if you have got dysfunction and there's tension there, you might need to be using some topical estrogen cream if you're not already on HRT. The topical estrogen cream is estriol, so it's, like I said before, the estriol estrogen is what is predominant in the pelvic area. It's very, very low dose. It doesn't go into the bloodstream, so it just stays topical. So it's like using a good eye cream. And it can just help muscle fibers that have become dehydrated and tight and dysfunctional to plump them up, and so they become a little bit more elastic and a little bit more comfortable. And especially those sphincter muscles around the urethra, around the anus, it can just help them plump up again so that they function a little bit better. And it can also just calm the bladder down. So if you have got an agitated bladder, and which is often a result of too much tension, it can just help with that re-elasticizing of the muscle fibers. It can help calm the bladder down as well. So I hope that's a good little bit of information, and I hope you're able to focus on releasing tension. It is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself. And of course, you know, I'm all about self-care. For us ladies, it is really the most selfless thing that we can possibly do. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste.